football is a sport that in particular really lends itself to surprising teams, good or bad, that have just significantly different results than anyone expected. But there's been something about this season specifically that has resulted in a ton of these teams. We have teams that were preseason top 10 that might go winless in conference. We have teams that were projected to win 2 to 3 games this season that are still undefeated. And it's pretty crazy, and it feels like things have been taken to an extreme this season. So in today's video, we're going to be going over those surprisingly good and surprisingly bad teams and talking about how this might have happened for them. Start with some of the heartwarming stories, the teams that weren't expected to be very good but have been surprisingly solid. The two teams I think of when it comes to this, Navy and Louisiana Monroe. Both teams that didn't have many expectations this season. Navy was projected to win 4 or 5 games, be in a very similar territory to where they were in year 1 under Brian Newberry. ULM was projected to be the worst team in all of college football. 134th was their preseason rating. And you look at where they both are now. ULM has jumped up 20 spots. They won a ton of games in the Sun Belt and could very well make a bowl game, which was completely outside of the considered realm of possibility. They have a first-year head coach in Brian Vincent that's now being talked about for jobs like the Southern Miss job and the East Carolina job. I know that Warhawks fans would hope he stays and continues to build at ULM, but it's been a pretty incredible season. And Navy's a team that all the way up at 64th. They started at 113. They're an American Conference championship contender. It's pretty nuts what both of these teams were able to do when they were projected to be some of the nation's worst. This sort of takes us into the next tier of surprisingly great teams. Teams that had high expectations this season, according to some people, and people thought they could be really solid, but they've just taken those high expectations and raised the bar another step. You take a team like South Carolina. They were expected to be middling in the SEC, preseason rated 35th, but they jumped all the way to 16th where they currently stand. They're a team that some people are talking about winning out down the stretch and being a playoff contender. Shane Beamer has simply gotten these guys up and they've won games they're not expected to win, and they put no doubt that Beamer is their guy going forward. The way he has coached this team and outcoached other guys in the SEC that have more resources than him at South Carolina. Army, one of the biggest discrepancies between preseason rating and current rating. They're currently rated as a top 25 team, which should not be possible as a service academy. It is unbelievable what they have done this season, and Army has just taken the American by storm in their first season in the conference. You've got a Tulane team that was expected to go through a rough transition year, but John Summerall once again showing he doesn't need that much time to turn a program into a winner. He did it at Troy in his first season. He won the Sun Belt, and in his first season at Tulane, they look like the favorites to win the American. Although Army might have something to say about that. That's going to be one heck of a clash between a couple of teams that might not have been expected to be in this position. And then there's Colorado. Colorado is a very polarizing team, but the ratings consensus was, yeah, they'll be a middle to low tier Big 12 team. They are now the favorites to win the Big 12 right now, which sounds ludicrous because you've got a team in Provo, Utah that's still undefeated. But if you go look at the odds on any betting website, Colorado is currently projected to win that conference, which is ridiculous. And then another Big 12 team in Arizona State, the Sun Devils, were 79th, expected to have maybe another rough transition year. But Kenny Dillingham has this team at 7-2, which is absolutely nuts. They've already clinched a bowl game. They could also be in the Big 12 title game. That's how nuts that is. And then you go ahead and flip to look at what their preseason ranking was to current ranking. The majority of these teams are in the top 25 in the AP right now. You've got Colorado at 18. You've got Arizona State, the one team that's just outside of the AP right now, but you could easily argue could be ranked. I put 27th there because they are receiving votes. But it's pretty nuts that not a single one of these teams was projected or a ranked team in the preseason AP poll, and now every single one of them is in the top 25. The last group of teams I just showed you is normal. Most seasons, there's about 5 or 6 teams that aren't preseason top 25, but end as one of the top 25 teams in the country and a team that is widely respected. But it's this tier that has pushed this season to just another level of parity and surprises in college football, and that's the teams that are surprisingly elite. BYU, SMU, Indiana. It's been 3 of the best stories in college football this season. BYU was projected to be a team that barely made a bowl game, if even that, in their second season in the Big 12. And yet Kalani Sitake's squad is undefeated. They're rated as number 22 in the country, and we'll show you their ranking in just a second. But they've been unbelievable. They're currently a top 10 team. SMU, they were expected to be really good, actually. Rating systems were high on them. I kind of pushed against that, but all of a sudden, their they're in the top 12 in terms of ratings, meaning they're saying not only can they make the college football playoff this season with only one loss, but Rhett Lashley's squad in his first season, in their first season in the ACC, might be the best team in the ACC and top 12 in the country. That is nuts. And then, of course, you have the Indiana Hoosiers, which was the biggest surprise because they're rated higher than any of these teams. Number 11 is their current rating, literally rating system saying this is the 11th best team in the country. Preseason, they were 81st among the bottom of the Big Ten. And of course, with all three of these teams, not a single one was in the top 25. SMU had some top 25 buzz that was there. And ironically, they're the lowest of these three. They're currently 14th in the AP, Indiana 6th, BYU 7th. All three of these teams could make the college football playoff this season. All three of these teams could win their respective conferences. It's absolutely disgusting to think about that this happened, and it is insane that these teams were so overlooked. Every team that's having a magical season where everything seems to be going right for them, there's a flip side of that coin. Teams that are just having the worst nightmare imaginable. And we'll start with the teams that are surprisingly mid. They had really high expectations. Virginia Tech, Utah, Oklahoma, all rated as top 40 and in most cases top 20 teams. App State rated as the top contender in the Sun Belt, and yet they've all been surprisingly mid. And the ratings might contradict that. Like Virginia Tech is actually rated higher than they were in the preseason. Utah and Oklahoma haven't dropped off that far, but in this case, it's a matter of wins and losses. Virginia Tech is 5-5. That's a team that was expected to win like 8 or 9 games. Oklahoma 5-5. They were rated a top 15 team preseason, and they've lost 5 games. The Utes, their season is completely crumbled. They only have one conference win, which is insane, and they were the odds-on favorite to win the Big 12. In some cases, a huge favorite to win the whole Big 12. And then you have a team like App State. They were expected to be a Sun Belt contender. Instead, they're among one of the bottom teams in their division, which is extremely shocking. 100th is their current rating. What a drop-off. And you look at their preseason rankings. Virginia Tech was receiving votes just outside the top 25, and Utah and Oklahoma were both ranked as well. None of these teams listed are ranked. App State has no shot at a conference title. In fact, none of these teams have a shot at a conference title. It is absolutely bonkers that these teams were rated so high and came out just so mid this season. But this is just scraping the surface. There are some teams that are in a much, much worse spot. Some teams that have come out this season and just been surprisingly bad. It's particularly disheartening. Rice is a team that was expected to at least be competitive in the American Conference, but they're currently at 3-7, and the wheels are just falling off. They've already fired Mike Bloomgren, as they should have. He was not the guy for them. FAU, they were preseason rated 108, but again, expected to be competitive, make a bowl game, at least improve in their second season under Tom Herman, but it's looking pretty bleak. Herman likely to be fired, one of the top guys in the hot seat right now. They had no wins in the American Conference right now, which is absolutely bananas, considering some people were probably picking these guys to be a contender or win the American Conference. Auburn is a team. Their rating hasn't dropped off, but again, a case of a team that just can't get any wins. If you're an Auburn football fan, or even if you're not, you know just how disastrous their season has been, how many games they've choked and lost, and how turnover prone they are this season. They still profile as nearly a top 25 rated team, and yet I wouldn't take them versus many teams in the country, and probably any team in the SEC right now. Maybe Mississippi State I'd take them against, but they were expected to be bad. And then you have Purdue. They were actually looking to be an impressive team this season, rated 13 spots higher than Indiana, who we talked about earlier in this video. They're currently 106. They only have one win this season, and they have been torched and just blown out and have never looked competitive. And it's been so bad that in just his second season, Ryan Walters is probably going to be canned. These teams are in a pit of despair. Some of them didn't even have too high of expectations, but they've just been surprisingly horrible. But here we are. We've reached the lowest and deepest depths of despair in college football. The teams that have been surprisingly caught in a nightmare season. Those two teams are Florida State and Oklahoma State. Preseason rated at 12th and 20th, expected to compete and potentially win their conferences. Their current ratings, 95th and 71st. And you look at the preseason rankings, it just makes it more jarring. 10th and 17th, both unranked now. It has been a complete and utter nightmare and disaster for both of these teams. Florida State with only one conference win, Oklahoma State with 0 Big 12 conference wins. And I'm going to repeat that. Oklahoma State has 0 Big 12 conference victories right now. It is utterly ridiculous that we have reached this point with both of these teams. Two teams that some people had pinned as playoff teams and conference champions. Florida State was the straight up favorite to win the ACC, and they have one win total. It is unbelievable how laughably bad these teams have been. I don't know if I have seen a nightmarish season as bad as Florida State's and as bad as Oklahoma State's have been this year. It is next level stuff, and it is something that only college football is capable of producing. That does it for this video. If you are a fan of one of these teams, let me know down in the comments how you're feeling right now. Either euphoric because of your dream season or just in the deepest, most darkest pit of despair of your entire life because you're having a nightmare season. And I really enjoyed making this video. It's always fun to dive into the teams that defied expectations either in a good or a bad way. We got a couple more videos coming out this week. We'll definitely have a playoff themed video, and also we'll be picking every single game for week 12 as well. It's very exciting. Great part of the season where a ton of these super important games. November is the best month of the season. I'm going to go out there and say it. But if you enjoy the video, go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, do all of that good stuff, and really just subscribe, honestly. I wouldn't care if that's the only thing that you did. But that's all I got for you guys, and I will see you guys later this week.